Number 3. Mitchell Harrison. In the autumn of 2011, 23-year-old Mitchell Harrison was incarcerated at HM Prison Franklin in Durham, England. In January 2010, he had been convicted of raping a 13-year-old girl in August 2009. He was given an indeterminate sentence, but he had to serve at least 4 years of prison. Harrison was considered a model inmate. Harrison was incarcerated with 23-year-old Nathan Mann and 32-year-old Michael Parr. On October 6, 2007, when Nathan Mann was 19 years old, he broke into the ground floor room of a nursing home. In the room were 56-year-old Rashmi Badani and 72-year-old Rabadhan Shahhan. Both women were bedbound. Mann wanted to steal something but couldn't find anything of value. He became so frustrated that he punched Badani to death and smothered Chauhan. In July 2008, Mann pleaded guilty to 2 counts of murder and he was sentenced to life in prison. Michael Parr was serving a life sentence for attempted murder. In 2003, he was being treated in a hospital and he tried to smother another patient. The psychiatrist described Parr as, quote, a remorseless, callous psychopath, unquote. Parr and Mann had a special bond. They both had homicidal fantasies. They also had cannibalistic urges. On October 1, 2011, they lured 23-year-old Mitchell Harrison into Mann's cell. Parr grabbed him and held him down. Initially, Mann tried to break Harrison's neck, but he couldn't. Mann had a scalpel he made from a razor blade and plastic utensils. He used it to cut Harrison's neck. He then stabbed him in the eye with a pen. After 23-year-old Mitchell Harrison was dead, using the prison-made scalpel, Parr cut his belly open. They planned on removing the liver, cutting it in half, and eating it. But their violent actions had surprised them both, and they couldn't bring themselves to eat it. Parr found a correctional officer and told them they had killed Harrison. Parr and Mann were asked why they did it, and they shrugged their shoulders. They explained that the murder was something they fantasized about. They decided to kill Harrison because Mann didn't like him and thought he was arrogant. In July 2012, both men pleaded guilty to murder. They were both given life sentences. Mann has to serve at least 40 years of prison before being considered for parole. Parr has to serve 32 years before he's considered for parole. Michael Parr can apply for parole in 2044 when he'll be 65. Number 2. Rocrast Mack. In August 2010, 24-year-old Rocrast Mack was serving a 20-year sentence at the Veterans Correctional Facility in Clayton, Alabama. About 6 months earlier, he was convicted of selling $10 worth of crack to an undercover police officer. On August 4, 2010, Rocrast Mack was brought to the hospital in Montgomery, Alabama. He was brain dead and needed to be put on a ventilator. Besides having significant brain injuries, he had injuries all over his entire body. His parents were notified, and his father came to the hospital. However, the prison warden wouldn't allow his father to see him. After several hours, the warden relented and let Mack's father into his son's hospital room. Mack's father said the room was full of correctional officers and they would not allow him to touch his comatose son. 24-year-old Rocrast Mack never woke up and died the next day. The prison's official statement was that Mack attacked a female correctional officer and he died while being restrained. Investigator with Alabama's State Bureau of Investigation read the report on the death. The official report stated that Mack received his injuries as he was being restrained. Everyone involved had followed prison protocols. But the investigator believed that something more sinister happened. The investigator thought that Mack's injuries were way too severe to have happened while being restrained. His skull, ribs, arms, and legs all suffered fractures. The investigator called the FBI and spoke to Special Agent Susan Hansen. Hansen agreed with the investigator's assessment that something was wrong, so she began to investigate Mack's death. She conducted hundreds of hours of interviews. She brought the evidence response team to the prison 6 times to do things like photograph witnesses' vantage points. What she discovered was shocking to some people, but anyone who knew anything about the Alabama prison system was not surprised. Like all prisons in Alabama, Veterans Correctional Facility was extremely overcrowded. It was built to hold 650 men, but in 2010, 1,665 men were incarcerated there. Mack was in a large dorm room with bunks. On the night of August 4, 2010, a female correctional officer was performing a head count. She believed Mack was masturbating under his blanket. Mack claimed he wasn't and got out of the bunk. The correctional officer pulled out her baton and then hit Mack in the face with a hand that didn't have the baton. After being hit, Mack ran behind his bunk. The correctional officer followed Mack and struck him again. Mack hit her back and bloodied her lip. Mack then ran towards the entrance of the dorm. Another correctional officer was there and ordered him to stop. Mack got on his knees and put his hands on his head. At this point, 6 other correctional officers arrived in the dorm. This included Shift Supervisor Lieutenant Michael Smith. There were at least 4 credible excessive force complaints made against Smith between 2009 and 2010. The 6 correctional officers proceeded to punch, kick, and beat Mack with their batons. Smith said something to the effect that they were going to kill him. Dozens of inmates watched the beating. The correctional officer who ordered Mack to stop running tried to stop the beating, but the other correctional officers made him leave the area. Mack managed to get up and ran to the prison's yard. The beating, which included being stomped on, continued in the yard. Even when he was unconscious, the beating continued. He was then taken to the guard's office. Witnesses saw Mack hit his head smash against the wall. Then the door to the office closed. A short time later, a nurse came in a golf cart, and Mack's unconscious body was loaded onto the cart. The other inmates in the dorm saw this, and they believed that Mack was dead. They tried to use the phones, and the correctional officers turned them off. Mack was taken to the infirmary. When he got there, correctional officers dropped him on the floor. Mack was then taken to the hospital, where he later died. Agent Hansen knew that Lieutenant Michael Smith was the ringleader of the murder. After the murder, Smith orchestrated a cover-up of the crime. He had people lie, including to the FBI, and he also had people falsify their reports. In January 2011, 2 correctional officers, including Smith, were fired and 4 resigned. In October 2011, just over a year after Mack's death, 37-year-old Smith was charged with his murder. 2 other correctional officers, 43-year-old Matthew Davidson and 31-year-old Joseph Sanders, were also charged. In November 2011, a 4th correctional officer involved in the beating, 30-year-old Scotty Glenn, worked out a deal with the FBI. He would testify against the other correctional officers in exchange for 5 years of prison. Matthew Davidson and Joseph Sanders also pleaded guilty. Davidson was sentenced to 7 years of prison, and Sanders received a 5-year sentence. Michael Smith went to trial in June 2013. He was looking at life in prison. The main evidence against him was the testimony of the other staff at the prison. The trial lasted 6 days. Smith was found guilty of killing Rocrast Mack and conspiring to cover it up. He was sentenced to 30 years in prison. According to the Federal Bureau of Prisons, 50-year-old Michael Smith is incarcerated at FCI Coleman Low in Sumner County, Florida. His projected release date is January 2038, when he'll be 63. Number 1. Donald McDougall. Ursula Sunshine Asade was born in San Jose, California in June 1977. When she was 2 years old, she and her mother, Susan Asade, moved across the country to Almonte Springs, Florida. In December 1981, 28-year-old Susan met 25-year-old Donald McDougall and they started dating. Soon after they started dating, they moved in together. McDougall was initially kind and patient with Ursula. But in August 1981, McDougall had become frustrated with the 5-year-old girl because she was having a bedwetting problem. So McDougall and Susan tried to limit her water intake, but they took it to horrifically abusive levels. Ursula brought a note to school from her mother that said she was not allowed to have anything to drink all day. No reason was given in the note. One night, Ursula drank some water while brushing her teeth. She was asked if she drank water, and she lied. To punish the 5-year-old, McDougall made her stand beside her bed all night. McDougall then started making her stand in the backyard to make sure she got fresh air. He didn't allow her to use the washroom while she was outside. Then, when she wet her pants, he berated her and forced her to come inside. He then made her stand in the house for up to 12 hours. It became normal for Ursula to stand up all night beside her bed. McDougall would set an alarm to get up in the middle of the night to check to see if she was awake and standing next to the bed. On September 22nd, the abuse escalated, and for the next 55 hours, Ursula suffered horribly. She was denied food, and then when she was fed, it was soaked between 2 pieces of bread. McDougall undressed her and made her stand naked or had her march. She was also forced to recite the alphabet or count to 20. If she missed a number or letter, she was hit. He also straddled her and repeatedly punched her in the stomach while calling her a whore. After the 55 hours of abuse, 5-year-old Ursula could no longer stand. Her mother tried feeding her, but Ursula couldn't hold a fork. Susan wanted to take Ursula to the hospital, but McDougall would not let her. He told her they would be arrested for child abuse. On September 25, 1982, 5-year-old Ursula died in her mother's arms. They stuffed her body into a canvas bag and filled it with weights. Then they tossed the body into a retention pond. After disposing of the body, Susan and McDougall moved to California. Susan was pregnant with McDougall's child. About 9 weeks after Ursula died, McDougall and Susan argued and he threatened to leave her. Susan felt like she could no longer keep the secret, so she went to the police and confessed. Both Susan and McDougall were arrested. Ursula's body was found in the pond. A cause of death could not be determined, but it's suspected she died of malnutrition. One of the most tragic aspects of the case is that 89 people supposedly knew about the abuse and no one did anything. This included neighbors who saw Ursula being forced to stand outside and the teacher who noticed she was too weak to play with the other children. McDougall also told several people about the abuse. Donald McDougall went to trial for first-degree murder in October 1983. The prosecution was seeking the death penalty. McDougall's lawyers contended the abuse happened, but he never intended to kill Ursula. They argued that McDougall should be found guilty of third-degree murder. In Florida, third-degree murder is the unlawful killing of a human being without premeditation or intent to kill, but resulting from an act that is inherently dangerous to others or demonstrates a depraved mind regardless of human life. The maximum sentence for third-degree murder was 15 years. Susan Asade took a plea deal and pleaded guilty to manslaughter. Part of the plea deal was that she had to testify against McDougall. At his trial, she detailed the terrible abuse he inflicted on Ursula. Both McDougall and Suzanne were abused as children. Some of the things McDougall did to Ursula were done to them when they were young. The trial lasted 2 weeks, and the jury deliberated for 7 hours. Donald McDougall was found guilty of second-degree murder. The jury could not decide if the murder had been premeditated. McDougall was sentenced to 34 years of prison. In July 1988, after spending 5 years in prison for the murder of her daughter, Susan Assaid was released from prison. Florida's prison system was overcrowded, and it had a program where inmates could shave time off their sentences for good behavior. In December 1992, Donald McDougall was expected to be paroled. He had only served 9.5 years. Many people were upset about his impending release. The Attorney General intervened and halted McDougall's release. The laws were changed to make it more difficult for violent offenders to shave time off their sentences. This was retroactive, so many inmates lost the time they had already accumulated. About 100 men who had been released were taken back into custody because under the new rules, they weren't eligible to be on parole. McDougall was already an unpopular inmate because of his crime. Then, many violent offenders blamed him for losing the time they had accumulated, making him even more unpopular. To avoid McDougall being hurt or murdered, he was transferred to different prisons throughout the state during his sentence. He had also been in and out of administrative confinement. Under the new parole rules, McDougall was scheduled to be released in the spring of 1997. People still weren't happy because he would have only had served 15 years. The host of the Russ Bowe and Dirty Jim radio talk show on WTKS in Orlando, Florida, discussed the case on February 25, 1996, the 14th anniversary of Ursula's death. The topic was an unusual departure from their normal programming. They didn't usually cover crime stories or social issues. Their typical material was crude shock jock humor. But they decided to discuss McDougall's impending release from prison in a few months. During the show, the host read passages from a book about the case, Death from Child Abuse and No One Heard, by Dana Welko and Eve Karpunski. Many of the passages they read detailed the horrific abuse Ursula experienced. Most people who called into the show were outraged. One person also put a bounty on Donald McDougall's life. The caller offered $1,000 to anyone who killed McDougall. When the show was broadcasted, McDougall was being held at the Avon Park Correctional Institution in Avon Park, Florida. Avon Park is in the broadcast range of WTKS. Prison officials heard the broadcast, and McDougall was immediately placed in administrative confinement for his own protection. On October 1, 1997, about 6 days after being held alone in a cell, McDougall signed himself out of administrative confinement. He was sure he was going to be fine. Hours after leaving administrative confinement, 40-year-old Donald McDougall, just months away from parole, was walking in the prison yard. Also in the yard was 33-year-old Arbor Barr, who was serving 114 years for armed robbery and aggravated battery. Barr picked up an iron bar used to play horseshoes. He hit McDougall in the head and cracked open his skull. After McDougall fell, he continued to strike him several more times with a bar. 40-year-old Donald McDougall did not survive his injuries. In November 1996, Barr pleaded guilty to second-degree murder. At Barr's sentencing hearing, his lawyer explained Barr's motivation to kill McDougall. Barr knew that McDougall was a child killer, however, he did not know exactly what he did to Ursula. Barr claims that McDougall was not sorry for what he did. Barr said that McDougall had been bragging about how after he got released, he would make money by doing interviews. Barr was disgusted that McDougall tortured a 5-year-old girl to death, and not only did he not care, but he also planned to profit from it. Barr said that when he learned the details of the torture from the radio show, he decided to kill McDougall. He said that he did not do it for the money. Barr was sentenced to life in prison. Arba Barr died in prison in 2009 at age 46. Details of his death were not available online. Some people believe that the host of the Rust Boat and Dirty Jim show incited the murder. The host said that when they did the broadcast, they had no idea McDougall was in a prison that could hear it. Other people said the host did nothing wrong. The hosts did not lose their jobs or face any repercussions for the broadcast. Thank you so much for watching today's video. We just want to remind you we started a channel membership where half the funds will go to solve a cold case. For more information, click on the video that's on the screen now. Well, that's all for today. Thanks again for watching.